The old church bell echoed through the dead of night, its haunting chimes signaling the hour of midnight. But no one rang it. There hadn't been a service at St. Michael's Cemetery for decades, not since the town was abandoned. As the bell tolled, it seemed to stir something ancient beneath the crumbling headstones. A cold breeze swept through the air, carrying whispers, faint and incomprehensible, like voices from another time. But that night, they were louder, much louder. "Have you ever heard a bell toll when there's no one to ring it?" Gavin asked, his voice low and filled with tension. The group of friends around him huddled closer as they stood just outside the cemetery gate. The night was unnaturally dark. Not even the moon dared to show its face. Only the dim glow of their flashlights illuminated the rusted iron gate in front of them. "Cut the spooky crap, Gavin," Leah muttered, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. "It's just an old cemetery. We'll be in and out." But something was different tonight. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on them. Gavin wasn't one to scare easily, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. "Not here." The gate creaked as they pushed it open, the sound shrieking into the quiet night. Leah led the way, but with every step, it felt as though the ground beneath them shifted, like the earth itself was warning them to turn back. None of them dared speak as they ventured deeper into the graveyard, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Then, the whispers began. It started as a low hum, so faint that at first, Gavin thought it was just the wind. But then it grew louder. Words. Distinct, but distorted, as if someone, something, was speaking just out of reach. Leah stopped suddenly, her breath catching in her throat. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced over her shoulder, but no one was there. "What?" Jake, the most skeptical of the group, snorted. "It's just your mind playing tricks." But the whispers grew louder, closer, now circling them like invisible hands tugging at their souls. Gavin's flashlight flickered. He shook it, muttering under his breath, but it continued to die, the light fading until they were left in near darkness. Suddenly, a shadow darted across their path, just at the edge of the flashlight's weak glow. Leah gasped, freezing in place. What was that? No one answered. The tension mounted as the group stood paralyzed, staring into the impenetrable blackness ahead. The whispers grew more insistent, more desperate, as if the voices were trying to warn them. And then, the ground beneath them trembled. Without warning, the earth split with a deafening crack, sending the group stumbling backward. Gravestones tipped over, the earth opening like a yawning mouth. Leah screamed, grabbing onto Gavin as a blackened hand emerged from the soil, clawing at the open air. Gavin's heart raced. He yanked Leah away, pulling her toward the safety of the church, but the ground continued to shake. All around them, the cemetery was coming to life, or rather, something beneath it was awakening. "Run!" Jake shouted, his face pale as a ghost. He didn't need to say it twice. The group sprinted toward the old church, its wooden doors hanging open like an invitation, or a trap. Gavin barely had time to think. His mind was a blur of fear, adrenaline, and the horrifying sight of that hand reaching from the ground. But as they reached the threshold, a chilling realization struck him. The whispers. They were coming from inside the church now. They burst into the church, slamming the doors behind them, gasping for breath. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their sudden entrance. The old pews were covered in cobwebs, and the altar stood in disrepair. But it wasn't the decay that sent a shiver down Gavin's spine. It was the voices. They were clearer now, louder, filling the room with their mournful chant. "It's coming from there," Leah whispered, pointing toward the confession booth at the far end of the church. "Don't even think about it," Jake muttered, his eyes wide with terror. "We're getting out of here." But something compelled them forward. Perhaps it was the unnatural pull of the voices, or the sheer curiosity that comes with facing the unknown. Gavin found himself walking toward the booth, his feet moving of their own accord. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if begging him to listen. He reached out, his hand trembling as he opened the wooden door. Inside the booth, it was pitch black, but something shifted in the shadows. "Tell us your sin." The voice was not his own, yet it echoed through the hollow church. Gavin stumbled backward, his mind reeling. The ground shook once more, and this time, something far worse than a hand began to emerge from beneath the floor. The floorboards split open, and through the cracks, the decayed, half-buried corpses began to rise. They were the forgotten ones, those who had been left behind when the town was abandoned, their skeletal faces twisted in agony, their hollow eyes filled with an unspeakable torment. Leah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the growing cacophony of voices, their screams merging with the whispers until it became one terrible wail of despair. They had waited for so long in the dark, their souls trapped in the cursed cemetery, and now they wanted vengeance. "Back!" Gavin shouted, grabbing Leah's arm and pulling her away from the rising dead. But it was too late. The corpses moved with unnatural speed, their decayed hands reaching out, pulling at their clothes, their skin. And then, without warning, the church bell rang again. The sound reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundations of the church. But this time, it wasn't a toll of death. It was a call, a summoning. The whispers stopped, and the dead paused. In the sudden silence, Gavin looked around, his heart pounding. Something was coming. He could feel it, a presence darker and more terrifying than the dead who had risen from their graves. "We have to leave," Jake shouted, his voice panicked. "Now!" But before they could move, the church doors flew open with a deafening crash. A figure stood in the doorway, cloaked in shadows. Its face was hidden, but its eyes, glowing red like embers, burned with an ancient rage. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the air with their insistent pleas. "Save us! Save us!" But Gavin knew, deep down, there was no saving them. Not from this. The figure moved closer, its feet not touching the ground, gliding toward them with an unearthly grace. The temperature plummeted, their breath visible in the cold. The dead began to move again, surrounding them, trapping them in the church. Gavin's mind raced. He couldn't think. There was no escape. But then, the whispers changed. A single voice broke through the cacophony, clear and distinct. "The bell! Ring the bell!" Without thinking, Gavin turned and ran toward the bell tower. He could hear Leah and Jake shouting behind him, but the voice in his head was louder, more urgent. He stumbled up the winding staircase, his legs burning with the effort, but he didn't stop. The bell! He had to ring the bell. As Gavin reached the top of the tower, he saw it, the great iron bell hanging above him. It was massive, old, and covered in rust. But somehow, he knew this was the key. This was what the whispers had been trying to tell him all along. With all his strength, he pulled the rope. The bell tolled once, twice. The sound echoed through the cemetery, and below, the dead froze in place. The figure stopped in its tracks, its glowing eyes flickering. But then, the ground trembled once more. The earth split open, and from beneath the graves, something far worse than the dead began to emerge. Gavin could hardly believe his eyes. The bell had stopped the dead, but at what cost? From the darkness below, something monstrous began to rise. Its massive form loomed over the cemetery, its shape barely visible in the dim light. And then, everything went black. The last thing Gavin heard was the bell's final toll, a chilling reminder that some things should never be disturbed. As the darkness closes in, you can't help but wonder, what would you do if you heard whispers in the graveyard? Would you investigate, or would you run? If this story left you with chills, don't forget to check out more spine-tingling tales on our channel. Just click on the next video and prepare yourself for another terrifying journey into the unknown. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, keep your lights on. CTA to another horror story video.